Objective, equations with decimals. So here are some decimal rules for you to recall. When you're adding or subtracting, you line up the decimal point. Sometimes you have to add zeros to get all your columns lined up, but you always line up the decimal point. When you're multiplying, you do not line up the decimal points. You basically ignore the decimal point, multiply, then count the number of places after the decimal point in the factors, which are the pieces you multiplied, and move over that many places in your answer, the product. I'm going to do an example on the next page. Number 3, the third thing to recall is when dividing, the divisor, which is the number you are dividing by, cannot have a decimal point. So you may need to move it if necessary. So here are some examples. Negative 2.9 plus negative 3.52. Same sign, sum, and it has a plus in there. So here's my negative 2.9, here's my negative 3.52. Notice this only has one place after the decimal point, and this has 2, so I added a 0, so all my columns are lined up. You need to do that. It's the smart thing to do. Okay? Now we just add. And it's a bigger negative, 6.42. Okay? Here's another one. 9.817 minus negative 1.49. What does minus a negative mean? Addition. So I rewrite the problem vertically. 9.817 plus 1.49, add my 0 so that my columns are lined up, and just add, going straight down, carry the decimal point straight down. Here I carried the decimal point straight down. Here are my answers. Okay? So it's the same thing with subtracting. I didn't think you needed another example. How about multiplying? 0.3 times 0.026. Now I know I'm not reading these as decimals. This should be 3/10, and this should be 26 thousandths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. But it's just, I just want you to be able to understand what we're doing. Okay? It seems like people are going away from reading it that way just for clarity anyhow, unfortunately. Anyhow, I'm going to ignore that there are decimals in this, and I'm just going to line it up like I normally do with the number, the factor that has the most number of digits on top. So this has 3 digits after the decimal, this has 1, so I'm going to put it on top. Okay, count the number of digits after the decimal. Here's 3 after the decimal point, here's 1 after the decimal point. Let's do our math. 3 times 6, 18, carry the 1. 3 times 2, 6 plus 1, 7. Okay, but we're not done, because this has 3 places, this has 1 place, so that's a total of 4 places after the decimal point. So I have to move over to, starting from the right and going to the left, 4 places after the decimal point. I mean 4 places, so my answer is 4 places after the decimal point. I only have 2 digits in my answer, so I have to add zeros. Sometimes you need to add zeros if necessary. If you don't remember this, you need to come see me, okay, and I'll help you. Finally, negative 29.07 divided by negative 1.9. So the first thing, when we're dealing with negatives, you need to decide if it's going to be positive or negative. In the addition, they were both negative, so you knew it was going to be negative. Here, we're division, 2 negatives, same sign equals positive. 2 negatives equal positive. So I'm just going to ignore the negatives in my math now. So 29.07 divided by 1.9. Here was my decimal point. I moved it, so let me make sure you can see it. Here it was. Okay? You're not allowed to have a decimal in your divisor. So if I need to move it over one place here to make it be not in the divisor, I also need to move the decimal point over one place here. Basically, I'm multiplying both numbers by 10. Okay? Then I bring up the decimal point where it's going to be, and now I just ignore it when I do my math. 19 goes into 29 once, subtract, get a 10, bring down my 0. 19 goes into 100 5 times, because 20 goes into 100 5 times. So that would be 5 times 19, 95, subtract, bring down my 7. 19 goes into 57 3 times. Okay, I've already brought this decimal point up, so when I do my math in my columns, which are straight, I don't have a problem, okay? And there's no remainder. All right, so that's your basic review. Now let's do some simple equations. Okay, x minus 4.3 equals 8.26. So I'm going to add 4.3 to both sides of the equation. Notice I added a 0 on this side, so I have the same number of places after the decimal point in both of my pieces. Add them together, I get x equals 12.56, and I've boxed my answer. X plus 3.15 equals 8.7. The blue is what I had to do extra. Okay, that's my original problem. I'm going to subtract 3.15 on both sides. So I added a 0, but now I have to subtract, and 0 take away 5 I can't do, so I needed to borrow. Crossed out the 7, made it a 6, crossed out the 0, made it a 10. Now I did my subtraction and I got 5.55. Boxed my answer. Here's another one where I had decimals in both pieces, okay? So x plus 2.55 equals negative 7.623. Subtract your 2.55 from both sides, added a 0 so that everything's lined up. Now, they're both negatives, so I'm really adding them together to increase my negative, okay? So I add my columns, I add it down, my answer is negative. This is where kids make the biggest mistakes, is they forget their negatives, okay? You need to be careful and think about it and just write it down first if you need to. Here's another example. This is a problem that was originally 3.5 times x equals 10.5. So I divide both sides by 3.5. That's what that's showing. Okay. You're not allowed to have a decimal in your divisor. The divisor is the bottom number. So I've written an equivalent equation. I multiplied 3.5 and 10.5 by 10 each, and now this is my equation. And so I can just do the math on this. This is pretty easy. Goes in 3 times. All right. Final problem. Oh, I forgot to write example by it. Let's write example. Okay. X divided by negative 8 equals 2.3. That was my problem. So what's the opposite of divide by negative 8? The inverse operation. Multiply both sides by negative 8. Now I wrote it 2 times. You don't need to do it. You could just do it on this one, but I wanted to show you what the original problem was without a bunch of confusion. Okay, anything over itself cancels out, so I get x. Now I look at this problem. I say it's 2.3 times negative 8. And I think to myself, is this going to be positive or negative? Negative. I write down the negative sign. 2.3 times 8. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So I go over here and do a little bit of math. 8 times 3, 8 times 2. Write it down. One place after the decimal, one place after the decimal. You're not lining up your decimal points. You're not making this be 8.0. That's a lot of extra work you don't need to do. Okay? You just ignore the decimal points, set it up as regular, and then put the decimal point in your answer based on how many places were after the decimal in your factors. Okay? And now, if I hadn't written this negative already, I might have just said x equals 18.4. And then I'd be wrong because it's negative 18.4. And notice I'm also boxing the answers. That's it.